Well, a number of violent encounters between law enforcement officers and black men made front-page news in recent months, but the vast majority of interactions never make the headlines. An increase in aggressive police tactics and racial profiling create numerous encounters that could escalate out of control. Well, what are the legal constraints on police, and what rights can someone assert when stopped by authorities? We wanted to answer those questions, so we brought in Tom Ruskin, who is a former New York City police officer and the president of CMP Group Investigations, which is a private investigative and security firm, and Neville Mitchell, who is a criminal defense attorney who has practiced in New York City for 20 years. He represented the parents of Sean Bell, who was shot and killed by police in 2006. Welcome, both of you gentlemen, to Arise America.
Thank you.
So this is such an important conversation, and I want people to understand from you, Neville, what their rights are, and from you, Tom, what the expectations are from law enforcement. So I want to start with rights, if I may. We have a graphic that we're going to put up, but when someone is stopped by the police, just give me the list of the things that they have to do.
Well, the main thing when somebody's stopped by the police is what I would advise them as a defense attorney is to comply with whatever is going on, because you're never going to win that fight. You're never going to win that argument on the street. But as far as what you have to do and what rights you have, you don't have to answer any questions. The regular standard Miranda rights, if you're arrested, you don't have to answer any questions. You certainly can ask why you're being stopped, why you're being arrested. This is not to say that those questions are actually going to be answered. In my practice, a lot of my clients tell me that those questions don't actually get answered.
And let me jump in there. If you're stopped in your vehicle, police comes to the window and tells you get out, do you have to get out? Is it your right to stay in the car?
You don't have a right to stay in the car. No.
You have to get out.
You should get out. You should get out. I mean, it sounds like, you can't argue over the merits of what the police officer is doing there when you were the individual in the car and the guy on the outside of the car has a gun in his hip.
The interaction, that's not the time during that interaction.
That's not the time to do that.
Let me ask you one other specific, and then Tom, I want to bring you into this. We all remember the actress Danielle Watts, who was stopped by police for public lewdness. She's being charged with that, just arraigned last week on this. She's an actress and was asked for her identification, and she refused to give the identification. Right. It escalated, and then eventually she was handcuffed. So if a police officer approaches you, do you have to identify yourself? In
New York City, you don't have to. You don't have to provide any ID.
So that's
for anything.
different from...
No. It might be different in some other places, but in New York City, there's no... Most people kind of think that if you ask for ID, you have to show ID, particularly, young black men think. There's no law that says you have to have ID on you or that you even have to show ID. The case that you talked about with the actress, a lot of these things escalate not because of whether the police officer is right or the police officer is wrong. It's a matter of dealing with people as human beings. And you can solve a lot of those problems at that stage if you have the right police officer.
All right, so Tom, take me into the mindset of a police officer who is out on the street and arguably putting their lives on the line every day. When they stop someone, what are their expectations of what that individual must do?
That they should comply. To Neville's point, we don't know. See, when you're sitting in the car, you don't know why the police officer has stopped you. You don't know why the police officer is asking you to step out of the car. I may be asking him to step out of the car because I'm planning to arrest him because I know he's wanted by something. I have a right then to ask him to step out of the car. I have a right to ask him certain questions, him or her, certain questions. You should answer those questions as long as they're not a violation of your rights. So, like, what's your name? You should answer it. Why wouldn't you want to answer it? Maybe, what are you doing in this area? Oh, I'm going to visit a friend. That may alleviate the situation right then and there.
And let me ask you this, and Neville already said this, that a person, I know you want to jump into it. Let me get through some basics and then what time we have left and then go back and forth. But, Neville says that that a person has the right to ask why they're being stopped or perhaps arrested. Does a policeman feel like they have the obligation to tell?
It depends why. And let me tell you something, as a cop on the street, making many car stops and stopping many people and making many arrests, I never had a problem unless I was confronted with a man who may be armed, or man or woman who may be armed. It depended on the circumstances. To Neville's point, I would suggest, do I have the right to go? Do I have a right to leave?
Do you have and you can ask, may I leave?
You can ask anything you want.
Let me ask, I want to
ask
push
in
you.
a nice way, like, officer, do I have the right? Can I leave?
Go ahead, respond.
That's ridiculous. I'm sorry, I just have to say that. If no police officer, if asked, do I have the right to leave, is going to respond, yes, you have the right to leave. That's just fantasy land.
That's not true, because that did happen.
Let me finish my point. That doesn't happen in young black men's lives on the streets. It just does not happen. Officer, do I have the right to leave? That's not going to happen. What happens invariably on the streets is that somebody is stopped for absolutely no reason. And when somebody's stopped for absolutely no reason, when you know that you're right, that you haven't done anything, obviously, as a human being, you're going to respond in a certain way. Like, why are you stopping me, right? It's not going to be, do I have the right? And so if you know that you're being illegally profiled or whatever is taking place, the person who knows that it's happening to them is a very visceral reaction that you're doing this to me and probably doing this to me for the however many times you've done it before. And that's the nexus of where everything happens. So there's not going to be any plain conversation.
I can see on Tom's face he has a response, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond. We need to take a quick break, and we're going to come back. We'll get the response to that. Do you have the right to leave? And also, I want to know what constitutes resisting arrest. We'll talk about that in just one moment. This is Arise America. We're back, and we have been in a dynamic conversation between Tom Ruskin, who is a former New York City police officer, as well as Neville Mitchell, who is a criminal defense attorney, talking about what are the rights of individuals when they interact with police, when police stop them for whatever reason, and what are the expectations of a police officer. And so before we went to break, Neville was making the point. I asked the question, can an individual ask to leave? Tom said yes very quickly. Neville said no way, that's not even realistic. Did you call it ridiculous?
I think I said ridiculous.
Right, yeah, I think so. Tom wanted to respond to that, and you say what?
It's not ridiculous. I have been there, I've seen it happen, and people have been allowed to leave. It depends why the police officer stopped the individual or the group. And certain times you say to members of the group, if you want to go, you can go. But we're going to talk to him or her a little bit longer.
So in these cases that have made headlines recently, particularly with Michael Brown and Eric Garner, there has been a differing of opinion about what constitutes resisting arrest, particularly with Eric Garner. We see on tape, everybody has seen it. Eric Garner says, well, you guys would leave me alone. He raises his hand and backs up. And I remember we talked about this, you and I talked about this on Arise America, and I said, he's just trying to be left alone. And you said, I see a man resisting arrest.
He is
so
resisting
how
arrest.
does a police officer process what constitutes resisting arrest?
A police officer who has made numerous arrests knows exactly when the one police officer who's a little shorter than Garner, well, a lot shorter than Garner, reaches for him and tries to grab him. At that point in time, that officer is trying to place him under arrest. Garner flings his arms back and moves away. Twice it happens on tape from the angle in which we're seeing it. That's resisting arrest.
So I just want to make sure that everybody understands. So a police officer, if someone does anything other than what they're being instructed to do by the police officer is going to process that as resisting arrest?
It is resisting arrest. If I'm telling him, if I'm grabbing him, I'm placing him under arrest. Otherwise, I have no right to touch him. And I don't think we'll disagree on that. I have no right as a police officer to touch another individual unless he's being placed under arrest. At that point in time where I'm grabbing him, he's being placed under arrest. Mr. Garner had been arrested 17, 18 times. He knew exactly what was going to happen, and he knew exactly what the police officers were doing.
Okay, let me move to another subject because we're running out of time, and I see you. I see the smoke
time.
coming out of your ears, Neville.
It's 2 seconds.
2 seconds.
It's a power situation. I'm looking at the same thing that with Eric Garner on that videotape, and he puts his hands up. From the police department's standpoint, is what they say is once the person says you're under arrest, and anything you do after that means that does not comply, means that you're resisting arrest. What we have to start to do is to interact as human beings, and if they had handled that situation differently, if they had seen Eric Garner as a human being, he wouldn't be dead. They didn't see him as a human being.
Let me move us forward before we run out of time and talk about the issue of recording an incident. We've been talking a lot about the value of body cams, but does an individual have the right to pick up their phone and record the interaction that's happening between them and the police officer?
Absolutely.
Is it in their best interest to do so?
It probably is not in their best interest because even bystanders who try to record what's happening with in a situation between a civilian and a police officer might have a problem. Police officers have confiscated telephones. I've had my telephones confiscated, taken away the recording device, erased recordings. You have the right to do it as a bystander. You have the right to record what's happening. But I'm not sure if you're being.
Does the police officer have the right to erase what's been recorded, Tom?
Absolutely not. Absolutely
But how do
not.
police feel about being recorded?
I would say probably when it came out originally, it was something that police officers weren't used to. Nowadays, the younger cops are so used to recording and being recorded, it's still a feeling a little bit, I don't know, but I think that it's becoming more of a custom use and something an officer thinks in his mind, someone could be recording me.
We need to do a whole expanded conversation about this. This is absolutely fascinating. and our black men need to know this information. Tom Ruskin,
I agree.
Neville Mitchell, thank you both, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thanks.